Because tramps like us, baby, we were born to run. Yeah, I'm a musician. You can tell. Hi guys, Dane here, and today I'm going to be making a start at the very least on my review of Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, the New York Times bestseller. So as always, I'm going to read you the blurb, I'm going to go through it and check out my tabs. I made a lot of tabs, and then I'll share my overall thoughts and rating at the end. So,
Dane reads.
Born to Run is an epic adventure that begins with one simple question. Why does my foot hurt? In search of an answer, Christopher McDougall sets out to find Mexico's Tarahumara Indians, the world's greatest distance runners, who can go for hundreds of miles without rest while enjoying every minute of it. Running without trainers is now big news, but the Tarahumara have been doing it for centuries and reaping the benefits. McDougall tests the idea by taking us from cutting-edge Harvard science labs to the peaks and valleys where growing numbers of ultra-runners are pushing themselves to the limit. And he finds his own inner ultra-athlete when he pits himself against the tribe, who run virtually barefoot, in a breathtaking 50-mile race through Mexico's Copper Canyons. A thinking exploration of mankind's most ancient pursuit, Born to Run will make you realise that the secret to happiness could be right at your feet. So, let's get started. So I picked this up because I've been getting increasingly into running myself, especially over the last year or so, taking it really seriously over the last 6 to 9 months. And he talks about his background here. He says, "The weird thing was, I seemed to be otherwise unbreakable. As a writer for Men's Health magazine and one of Esquire magazine's original Restless Man columnists, a big part of my job was experimenting with semi-extreme sports. I'd ridden Class 4 rapids on a boogie board, surfed giant sand dunes on a snowboard, and mountain biked across the North Dakota Badlands. I'd also reported from 3 war zones for the Associated Press and spent months in some of the most lawless regions of Africa, all without a nick or a twinge. But jog a few miles down the street and suddenly I'm rolling on the ground like I've been gut shot in a drive-by. Take any other sport and an injury rate like mine would classify me as defective. In running, it makes me normal. The real mutants are the runners who don't get injured. Up to 8 out of every 10 runners are hurt every year. It doesn't matter if you're heavy or thin, speedy or slow, a marathon champ or a weekend huffer, you're just as likely as the other guy to savage your knees, shins, hamstring, hips or heels. Next time you line up for a turkey trot, look at the runners on your right and left. Statistically, only one of you will be back for the Jingle Bell jog." I guess the turkey trot is a Thanksgiving run, fun run, and the Jingle Bell jog is a Christmas one. But that actually doesn't make sense, because if it's 8 out of 10 every year, there's only like a month between those two events. Also, I guess I'm one of the lucky ones because I haven't been injured this year. And he writes, "You know what kind of nerves are in your feet? The same ones that network into your genitals. Your feet are like a minnow bucket full of sensory neurons, all of them wriggling around in search of sensation. Stimulate those nerves just a little, and the impulse will rocket through your entire nervous system. That's why tickling your feet can overload the switchboard and cause your whole body to spasm." And I thought this was quite interesting too. There's something so universal about that sensation, the way running unites our 2 most primal impulses, fear and pleasure. We run when we're scared, we run when we're ecstatic, we run away from our problems and run around for a good time. And when things look worse, we run the most. 3 times America has seen distance running skyrocket, and it's always in the midst of a national crisis. The first boom came during the Great Depression, when more than 200 runners set the trend by racing 40 miles a day across the country in the Great American Foot Race. Running then went dormant, only to catch fire again in the early 70s, when we were struggling to recover from Vietnam, the Cold War, race riots, a criminal president, and the murders of 3 beloved leaders. And the third distance boom? 1 year after the September 11 attacks, trail running suddenly became the fastest growing outdoor sport in the country. Maybe it was a coincidence. Or maybe there's a trigger in the human psyche, a coded response that activates our first and greatest survival skill when we sense the raptors approaching. In terms of stress relief and sensual pleasure, running is what you have in your life before you have sex. The equipment and desire come factory installed. All you have to do is let her rip and hang on for the ride. This is interesting, we get a reference to Lance Armstrong, but didn't he get caught in a doping scandal? Anyway, he writes, Lance Armstrong is one of the greatest endurance athletes of all time, and he could barely shuffle through his first marathon despite sucking down an energy gel nearly every mile. Lance's text message to his ex-wife after the New York City Marathon: "Oh my god, ouch, terrible." Yet these guys were knocking them out a dozen at a time. So we get something called Ischiate, which is the Tarahumara equivalent of an energy drink. And I'm determined to make this for myself at some point. We have a sudden quality update because I have switched my filming setup. It's also been quite a while since I filmed where I was. Anyway, I found this really interesting and I've been determined to make it myself. I might pronounce it wrong, but we will see. Homebrewed Red Bull. Now this I had to try. I'll save it for later, I told Angel. I poured the Ischiate into a hip bottle that was half full of water I'd purified with iodine pills, then tossed in a couple of extra pills for good measure. I was dog-tired, but unlike Lumholtz, I wasn't desperate enough to risk a year-long bout of chronic diarrhea from waterborne bacteria. Months later, I'd learned that Ischiate is otherwise known as chia fresca, chili chia. It's brewed up by dissolving chia seeds in water with a little sugar and a squirt of lime. In terms of nutritional content, a tablespoon of chia is like a smoothie made from salmon, spinach, and human growth hormone. As tiny as those seeds are, they're super packed with omega-3s, omega-6s, protein, calcium, iron, zinc, fibre, and antioxidants. If you had to pick just one desert island food, you couldn't do much better than chia, at least if you were interested in building muscle, lowering cholesterol, and reducing your risk of heart disease. After a few months on the chia diet, you could probably swim home. Chia was once so treasured, the Aztecs used to deliver it to their king in homage. Aztec runners used to chomp chia seeds as they went into battle, and the Hopis fueled themselves on chia during their epic runs from Arizona to the Pacific Ocean. The Mexican state of Chiapas is actually named after the seed. It used to rank right up there with corn and beans as a cash crop. Despite its liquid gold status, chia is ridiculously easy to grow. If you own a chia pet, in fact, you're only a few steps away from your own batch of devil drink. And a damn tasty devil drink at that, as I discovered once the iodine had melted enough to risk a few swigs. Even with the medicinal afterbite from the pills, the Ischiate went down like fruit punch with a nice slimy tang. Maybe the excitement of the hunt had something to do with it, but within minutes I felt fantastic. Even the low throbbing headache I'd had all morning from sleeping on a frosty dirt floor the night before had vanished. Great quote here from Ken Schluber, Colorado miner and creator of the Leadville Trail 100. He said, "Make friends with pain and you will never be alone." And yeah, we're learning about the Leadville Trail. It's a 100-mile race. Leadville's top physician heard what was happening and he said, "You cannot let people run 100 miles at this altitude." And he says, to get a sense of what he came up with, try running the Boston Marathon 2 times in a row with a sock stuffed in your mouth and then hike to the top of Pikes Peak. Done? Great, now do it all again, this time with your eyes closed. That's pretty much what the Leadville Trail 100 boils down to. Nearly 4 full marathons, half of them in the dark, with twin 2,600 foot climbs smack in the middle. Leadville's starting line is twice as high as the altitude where planes pressurise their cabins, and from there you only go up. It says nobody's actually died from it yet. It says one Leadville legend is Marshall Ulrich, an affable dog food tycoon who perked up his times by having his toenails surgically removed. They kept falling off anyway, he said. We get a guy called Dr. Joe Vigil. Dr. Joe Vigil, a 65-year-old army of one, warmed his hands around his coffee as he waited for the first flashlight beams to come stabbing toward him through the woods. No other elite coach in the world was anywhere near Leadville, because no other elite coach could give a hoot what was going on at that giant outdoor insane asylum in the Rockies. Self-mutilators, mean motherfuckers, or whatever they called themselves, what did that have to do with real running, with Olympic running? As a sport, most track coaches ranked ultras somewhere between competitive eating and recreational S&M. And I get some really interesting sort of research and theory this guy has. He'd figured out the body, so now it was onto the brain. Specifically, how do you make anyone actually want to do any of this stuff? How do you flip the internal switch that changes us all back into the natural born runners we once were? Not just in history, but in our own lifetimes. Remember? Back when you were a kid and you had to be yelled at to slow down. Every game you played at top speed, sprinting like crazy as you kicked cans, freed all, and attacked jungle outposts in your neighbours' backyards. Half the fun of doing anything was doing it at a record pace, making it probably the last time in your life you'd ever be hassled for going too fast. That was the real secret of the Tarahumara. They'd never forgotten what it felt like to love running. They remembered that running was mankind's first fine art, our original act of inspired creation. Way before we were scratching pictures on caves or beating rhythms on hollow trees, we were perfecting the art of combining our breath and mind and muscles into fluid self-propulsion over wild terrain. And when our ancestors finally did make their first cave paintings, what were the first designs? A downward slash, lightning bolts through the bottom and middle. Behold, the running man. We get some good stuff about the Beat Poets and Charles Bukowski, who are authors I'm fans of. So this is, what their names? Jen and Billy, 2 like hippie trail runners who end up joining this epic race. Says, you ever heard of the Mountain Masochist? Billy asked Jen. Nope, who's he? It's a race, you crackhead, 50 miles in the mountains. Neither of them had even run a marathon before. They'd been beach kids all their lives, so they'd barely seen mountains, let alone running them. They wouldn't even be able to train properly. The tallest thing around Virginia Beach was a sand dune. 50 mountain miles was way over their heads. Dude, that's totally it, Jen said. I'm in. They needed some serious help, so Jen looked where she always did when she needed guidance. And as usual, her favourite chain-smoking alcoholics came through in the clutch. First, she and Billy dug into the Dharma Bums and began memorising Jack Kerouac's description of hiking the Cascadia Mountains.
Try the meditation of the trail. Just walk along looking at the trail at your feet and don't look about and just fall into a trance as the ground zips by, Kerouac wrote. Trails are like that. You're floating along in a Shakespearean Arden paradise and expect to see nymphs and flute boys. Then suddenly you're struggling in a hot broiling sun of hell in dust and nettles and poison oak, just like life. Our whole approach to trail running came from Dharma Bums, Billy told me later. As for inspiration, that's where Charles Bukowski stepped up. If you're going to try, go all the way, the original Barfly wrote. There is no other feeling like that. You will be alone with the gods, and the nights will flame with fire. You will ride life straight to perfect laughter. It's the only good fight there is. Soon after, surf fishermen noticed weird goings-on each evening as the sun set on the Atlantic. Chants would echo across the dunes, visions, omens, hallucinations, followed by the appearance of some kind of loping, howling, four-legged man-beast. As it got closer, they could see it was actually two people running shoulder to shoulder. One was a slim young woman with a gay pride bandana on her head and a vampire bat tattooed on her arm, while the other, as best as they could make out, seemed to be a welterweight werewolf under a rising moon. Before setting out for their sunset runs, Jen and Billy would snap a tape of Allen Ginsberg reading Howl into their Walkman. When running stopped being as fun as surfing, they had agreed they'd quit. So to get that same surging glide, that same feeling of being lifted up and swept along, they ran to the rhythm of beat poetry. I must try that. We get a bit more about Jen as well. It says, Jen didn't have a coach or a training program. She didn't even own a watch. She just rolled out of bed every morning, downed a veggie burger and ran as far and as fast as she felt like, which usually turned out to be about 20 miles. Then she hopped on the skateboard she'd bought instead of a parking pass and kicked off to class at Old Dominion, where she'd recently dropped back into school and was making straight A's. I never really discussed this with anyone because it sounds pretentious, but I started running ultras to become a better person, Jen told me. I thought if you could run 100 miles, you'd be in this zen state. You'd be the fucking Buddha, bringing peace and a smile to the world. It didn't work in my case. I'm still the same old punk ass as before, but there's always that hope that it will turn you into the person you want to be, a better, more peaceful person. When I'm out on a long run, she continued, the only thing in life that matters is finishing the run. For once, my brain isn't going blah, blah, blah all the time. Everything quiets down and the only thing going on is pure flow. It's just me and the movement and the motion. That's what I love, just being a barbarian, running through the woods. An interesting note here, he points out, running shoes have only been around about as long as the space shuttle. Before that, your dad wore flat rubber gym shoes and your granddad was in leather ballet slippers. For millions of years, humans ran without arch support, pronation control, or gel-filled pods under their heels. How the hell they managed? Ted had no idea. And then there's some interesting information about injuries. Whenever you get a group of runners together, they always talk about their injuries, and there's a good reason for that. He says, risk isn't quite the right term, it's more like dead certainty. Every year, anywhere from 65 to 80% of all runners suffer an injury. That's nearly every runner every single year. No matter who you are, no matter how much you run, your odds of getting hurt are the same. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, fast or slow, pudgy or ripped as a racehorse, your feet are still in the danger zone. Maybe you'll beat the odds if you stretch like a swami. Nope. In a 1993 study of Dutch athletes published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine, one group of runners was taught how to warm up and stretch, while a second group received no injury prevention coaching. Their injury rates? Identical. Stretching came out even worse in a follow-up study performed the following year at the University of Hawaii. It found that runners who stretch were 33% more likely to get hurt. Luckily for us, though, we live in a golden age of technology. Running shoe companies have had a quarter century to perfect their designs, so logically, the injury rate must be in free fall by now. After all, Adidas has come up with a $250 shoe with a microprocessor in the sole that instantly adjusts cushioning for every stride. ASICS spent $3 million in 8 years, 3 more than it took the Manhattan Project to create the first atomic bomb, to invent the awe-inspiring Kinsei, a shoe that boosts multi-angled forefoot gel pods, a mid-foot thrust enhancer, and an infinitely adaptable heel component that isolates and absorbs impact to reduce pronation and aid in forward propulsion. That's big bucks for sneaks you'll have to toss in the garbage in 90 days, but at least you'll never limp again, right? Sorry. Since the first real studies were done in the late 70s, Achilles complaints have actually increased by about 10%, while plantar fasciitis has remained the same, says Dr. Stephen Prebut, a running injury specialist and past president of the American Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine. The technological advancements over the past 30 years have been amazing, adds Dr. Irene Davis, the director of the Running Injury Clinic at the University of Delaware. We've seen tremendous innovations in motion control and cushioning, and yet the remedies don't seem to defeat the ailments. We get mention of the ultra runner's creed. If you can't see the top, walk. When you're running 50 miles, there's no dividend in bashing up the hills and then being winded on the way down. You only lose a few seconds if you walk, and then you can make them back up by flying downhill. Eric believes that's one reason ultra runners don't get hurt and never seem to burn out. They know how to train, not strain. So we learn a bit more about Scott Jurek, who I actually met at the National Running Show. He was more than happy to take a photo with myself and some other people from Vegan Runners. Running kit in the background there. Because he is also vegan, and we get a little bit about the reasoning behind that. Growing up in Minnesota, I used to be a total junk eater, he said. Lunch used to be 2 McChickens and a large fries. When he was a Nordic skier and cross-country runner in high school, his coaches were always telling him he needed plenty of lean meat to rebuild his muscles after a tough workout. Yet the more Scott researched traditional endurance athletes, the more vegetarians he found. Like the marathon monks in Japan he'd just been reading about. They ran an ultra-marathon every day for 7 years, covering some 25,000 miles on nothing but miso soup, tofu and vegetables. And what about Percy Caruti, the mad Australian genius who coached some of the greatest milers of all time? Caruti, I have no idea if that's how you pronounce his name by the way, believed food shouldn't even be cooked, let alone slaughtered. He put his athletes through triple sessions on a diet of raw oats, fruit, nuts and cheese. Even Cliff Young, the 63-year-old farmer who stunned Australia in 1983 by beating the best ultra runners in the country in a 507-mile race from Sydney to Melbourne, did it all on beans, beer and oatmeal. I used to feed the calves by hand and they thought I was their mother, Young said. I couldn't sleep too good those nights when I knew they would get slaughtered. He switched to grains and potatoes and slept a whole lot better. Ran pretty good too. Scott wasn't sure why meatless diets worked for history's great runners, but he figured he'd trust the results first and figure out the science later. From that point on, no animal products would pass his lips, no eggs, no cheese, not even ice cream, and not much sugar or white flour either. He stopped carrying Snickers and power bars during his long runs. Instead, he loaded a fanny pack with rice burritos, pizza stuffed with hummus and Kalamata olives, and home-baked bread smeared with adzuki beans and quinoa spread. When he sprained his ankle, he eschewed ibuprofen and relied instead on wolfsbane and whomping portions of garlic and ginger. Sure, I had my doubts, Scott said. Everyone told me I'd get weaker, I wouldn't recover between workouts, I'd get stress fractures and anemia. But I found that I actually feel better because I'm eating foods with more high quality nutrients. And after I won Western States, I never looked back. By basing his diet on fruits, vegetables and whole grains, Scott is deriving maximum nutrition from the lowest possible number of calories, so his body isn't forced to carry or process any useless bulk. And because carbohydrates clear the stomach faster than protein, it's easier to jam a lot of workout time into his day, since he doesn't have to sit around waiting for a meatball sub to settle. Vegetables, grains and legumes contain all the amino acids necessary to build muscle from scratch. Like a Tarahumara runner, he's ready to go any distance, any time. Unless of course he runs out of water. And I have big respect there to Christopher McDougall for kind of writing that in such a balanced way. I mean, again, this was first published in 2009. I think obviously veganism and plant-based diets have become more popular since then, but it would have been very easy for him to let his natural bias creep into that, and you know, he didn't. So kudos to him. And we get a reference of plantar fasciitis. Once plantar fasciitis sinks its fangs into your heels, you're in danger of being infected for life. Check any running-related message board and you're guaranteed to find a batch of beseeching threads from PF sufferers begging for a cure. Everyone is quick to suggest the same remedies: night splints, elastic socks, ultrasound, electroshock, cortisone, orthotics. But the messages keep coming because none of them really seems to work. And I had a bit of plantar fasciitis when I first got started. We've got a quote here from Jack Kirk, the Dipsy Demon. You don't stop running because you get old. You get old because you stop running. And so here Christopher McDougall's trying to learn to become a better runner himself and is asking some questions. I just don't think I'm built for running 50 miles, I said. Everyone is built for running. Every time I up my miles, I break down. You won't this time. Should I get the orthotics? Forget the orthotics. I was dubious, but Eric's absolute confidence was winning me over. I should probably cut weight first to make it easier on my legs. Your diet will change all by itself, wait and see. How about yoga? That'll help, yeah? Forget yoga. Every runner I know who does yoga gets hurt. I mean every runner gets hurt, to be fair. I do a little bit of yoga with the vegan runners lot. We get some interesting stuff about the different kinds of running as well. Eric also had me get a heart rate monitor so I could correct the second most common mistake of the running class: pace. Most of us are just as clueless about speed as we are about form. Nearly all runners do their slow runs too fast and their fast runs too slow, Ken Miyake says. So they're just training their bodies to burn sugar, which is the last thing a distance runner wants. You got enough fat stored to run to California, so the more you train your body to burn fat instead of sugar, the longer your limited sugar tank is going to last. The way to activate your fat burning furnace is by staying below your aerobic threshold, your hard breathing point, during your endurance runs. Respecting that speed limit was a lot easier before the birth of cushioned shoes and paved roads. Try blasting up a scree-covered trail in open-toed sandals sometime, and you'll quickly lose the temptation to open the throttle. When your feet aren't artificially protected, you're forced to vary your pace and watch your speed. The instant you get recklessly fast and sloppy, the pain shooting up your shins will slow you down. And he talks about he buys some Nike Pegasus shoes from 2000. And he says, Nike's policy of yanking best-selling shoes from the shelves every 10 months has inspired some truly operatic bursts of profanity on running message boards. The Nike Pegasus, for instance, debuted in 1981, achieving its sleek, waffled apotheosis in 83, and then, despite being the most popular running shoe of all time, was suddenly discontinued in 98, only to reappear as a whole new beast in 2000. Why so much surgery? Not to improve the shoe, as a former Nike shoe designer who worked on the original Pegasus told me, but to improve revenue. Nike's aim is to triple sales by enticing runners to buy 2, 3, 5 pairs at a time, stockpiling in case they never see their favourites again. That's some scummy business practice. Makes me glad I run in Brooks. So we learn a little bit about diseases as well. And again, if you've ever heard of or read How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger, it's all about plant-based food and a plant-based diet and how that can make you live longer. And he says, the first step toward going cancer-free the Tarahumara way, consequently, is simple enough. Eat less. The second step is just as simple on paper, though tougher in practice. Eat better. Along with getting more exercise, says Dr. Weinberg, we need to build our diets around fruit and vegetables instead of red meat and processed carbs. The most compelling evidence comes from watching cancer cells fight for their own survival. When cancerous tumours are removed by surgery, they are 300% more likely to grow back in patients with a traditional Western diet than they are in patients who eat lots of fruit and veggies, according to a 2007 report by the Journal of the American Medical Association. Why? Because stray cells left behind after surgery seem to be stimulated by animal proteins. Remove those foods from your diet, and those tumours may never appear in the first place. Eat like a poor person, as Coach Joe Vigil likes to say, and you'll only see your doctor on the golf course. Anything the Tarahumara eat you can get very easily, Tony told me. It's mostly pinto beans, squash, chili peppers, wild greens, pinole, and lots of chia. And pinole isn't as hard to get as you think. NativeSeeds.org sells it online, along with heritage seeds in case you want to grow your own corn and whiz up some homemade pinole in the coffee grinder. Protein is no problem. According to a 1979 study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, the traditional Tarahumara diet exceeds the United Nations recommended daily intake by more than 50%. As for bone strengthening calcium, that gets worked into tortillas and pinole with the limestone the Tarahumara women use to soften the corn. So this is interesting. This talks about the difference between being an athlete and being a runner. The Tarahumara aren't great runners, Eric messaged me as we began my second month of those workouts. They're great athletes, and those two things are very different. Runners are assembly line workers. They become good at one thing, moving straight ahead at a steady speed, and repeat that motion until overuse fritzes out the machinery. Athletes are Tarzans. Tarzan swims and wrestles and jumps and swings on vines. He's strong and explosive. You never know what Tarzan will do next, which is why he never gets hurt. Your body needs to be shocked to become resilient, Eric explained. Follow the same daily routine and your musculoskeletal system quickly figures out how to adapt and go on autopilot. But surprise it with new challenges. Leap over a creek, commando crawl under a log, sprint till your lungs are bursting, and scores of nerves and ancillary muscles are suddenly electrified into action. And there's a quote here which I keep using, Frank Shorter. He says, hills are speed work in disguise. And it's true. The more you run up hills, the faster you tend to get. And he writes here, like Caballo, the Tarahumara secret had begun working for me before I even understood it. Because I was eating lighter and hadn't been laid up once by injury, I was able to run more. Because I was running more, I was sleeping great, feeling relaxed and watching my resting heart rate drop. My personality had even changed. The grouchiness and temper I'd considered part of my Irish-Italian DNA had ebbed so much that my wife remarked, "Hey, if this comes from ultra running, I'll tie your shoes for you." I knew aerobic exercise was a powerful antidepressant, but I hadn't realised it could be so profoundly mood stabilising and, I hate to use the word, meditative. If you don't have answers to your problems after a 4-hour run, you ain't getting them. And it talks about a theory that humans evolved to how they are, so that they could be better runners. Dr. Bramble's secondary expertise in fossils allowed him to compare how the human blueprint had been modified over the millennia and check it against other designs. Right off the bat, he began finding things that didn't fit. Instead of looking at the conventional list like most morphologists and ticking off the things I expected to see, I began focusing on the abnormalities, Bramble said. In other words, what's there that shouldn't be there? He began by splitting the animal kingdom into two categories, runners and walkers. Runners include horses and dogs, walkers are pigs and chimps. If humans were designed to walk most of the time and run only in emergencies, our mechanical parts should match up pretty closely to those of other walkers. Common chimps were the perfect place to start. Not only are they a classic example of the walking animal, but they're also our closest living relative. After more than 6 million years of separate evolution, we still share 95% of our DNA sequence with chimps. But what we don't share, Bramble noted, is an Achilles tendon, which connects the calf to the heel. We've got one, chimps don't. We have very different feet. Ours are arched, chimps are flat. Our toes are short and straight, which helps running, while chimps are long and splayed, much better for walking. And check out our butts. We've got a hefty gluteus maximus, chimps have virtually none. Dr. Bramble then focused on a little known tendon behind the head known as the nuchal ligament. Chimps don't have a nuchal ligament, neither do pigs. No, who does? Dogs, horses, and humans. Now this was perplexing. The nuchal ligament is useful only for stabilising the head when an animal is moving fast. If you're a walker, you don't need one. Big butts are only necessary for running. See for yourself, clutch your butt and walk around the room sometime. It will stay soft and fleshy and only tighten up when you start to run. Your butt's job is to prevent the momentum of your upper body from flipping you onto your face. Likewise, the Achilles tendon serves no purpose at all in walking, which is why chimps don't have one. Neither did Australopithecus, that's as best as I can say that. Our semi-simian 4 million year old ancestor. Evidence of an Achilles tendon only began to appear 2 million years later in Homo erectus. Dr. Bramble then took a closer look at the skulls and got a jolt. Holy moly, he thought, there's something going on here. The back of the Australopithecus skull was smooth, but when he checked Homo erectus, he found a shallow groove for a nuchal ligament. A mystifying but unmistakable timeline was taking shape. As the human body changed over time, it adopted key features of a running animal. We get this great little bit for equality here, but it's also just interesting to learn how motherhood can work alongside ultra running. Caring for kids on the fly isn't that hard, as American ultra runner Cami Semick demonstrates. She likes to run mountain trails around Bend, Oregon with her 4-year-old daughter, Barony, riding along in a backpack. Newborns? No problem at all. At the 2007 Hard Rock 100, Emily Bear beat 90 other men and women to finish 8th overall while stopping at every aid station to breastfeed her infant son. The Bushmen are no longer nomadic, but the equal partners in hunting tradition still exists alongside the Mabuti pygmies of the Congo, where husbands and wives with nets pursue the giant forest hogs side by side. Since they are perfectly capable of giving birth to a child while on the hunt, then rejoining the hunt the same morning, notes anthropologist Colin Turnbull, who spent years among the Mabuti, mothers see no reason why they should not continue to participate fully. And this is really fascinating, just the importance of running for health. The brain is always scheming to reduce costs, get more for less, store energy and have it ready for an emergency, Bramble explained. You got this fancy machine and it's controlled by a pilot who's thinking, okay, how can I run this baby without using any fuel? You and I know how good running feels because we made a habit of it. But lose the habit and the loudest voice in your ear is your ancient survival instinct urging you to relax. And there's the bitter irony. Our fantastic endurance gave our brain the food it needed to grow, and now our brain is undermining our endurance. We live in a culture that sees extreme exercise as crazy, Dr. Bramble says, because that's what our brain tells us. Why fire up the machine if you don't have to? To be fair, our brain knew what it was talking about for 99% of our history. Sitting around was a luxury, so when you had the chance to rest and recover, you grabbed it. Only recently have we come up with the technology to turn lazing around into a way of life. We've taken our sinewy, durable hunter-gatherer bodies and plunked them into an artificial world of leisure. And what happens when you drop a life form into an alien environment? NASA scientists wondered the same thing before the first space flights. The human body had been built to thrive under the pressure of gravity, so maybe taking away that pressure would act as an escape trajectory fountain of youth, leaving the astronauts feeling stronger, smarter and healthier. After all, every calorie they ate would now go towards feeding their brains and bodies, instead of pushing up against that relentless downward pull, right? Not by a long shot. By the time the astronauts returned to Earth, they'd aged decades in a matter of days. Their bones were weaker and their muscles had atrophied. They had insomnia, depression, acute fatigue and listlessness. Even their taste buds had decayed. If you've ever spent a long weekend watching TV on the sofa, you know the feeling, because down here on Earth we've created our own zero-gravity bubble. We've taken away the jobs our bodies were meant to do and we're paying for it. Nearly every top killer in the Western world, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, depression, hypertension, and a dozen forms of cancer, was unknown to our ancestors. They didn't have medicine, but they did have a magic bullet, or maybe two, judging by the number of digits Dr. Bramble was holding up. You could literally hold epidemics in their tracks with this one remedy, he said. He flashed 2 fingers up in a peace sign, then slowly rotated them downward till they were scissoring through space. The running man. So simple, he said. Just move your legs, because if you don't think you were born to run, you're not only denying history, you're denying who you are. We get this great quote from Gabe Jennings, 2000 US Olympic trial 1500 meter winner. Often I visualize a quicker, like almost a ghost runner, ahead of me with a quicker stride. Which I do quite often as well, and that kind of pulls you ahead. But it's almost like, it's like the ghost you get on like Mario Kart when you're racing against a time trial record. And then we get to the kind of the culmination of this, which is the epic run, which pits Scott Jurek against the Tarahumara. I'm not going to tell you who won that. There's lots of information online if you want. But yeah, it's this 50-mile kind of trail run, essentially, trail race, which is kind of what the book is building up towards. But as you can see from the quotes I've read, a lot of this is about, it's more about like the science of running and the history of running and things like that. It kind of implies, again, we've got the hidden tribe, the ultra runners, and the greatest race the world has never seen. Well, this greatest race only really happens in the last 20 pages. It's very much more about running as a phenomenon in itself. And yeah, I mean, I loved it. I'm obviously a keen runner. I found it really fascinating. A lot of people got into barefoot running after this, although it's since kind of waned in popularity again. I'm personally not interested in barefoot running, but it was very cool to meet Scott Jurek, who is kind of quoted throughout this. Christopher McDougall seems like a cool dude. I gave Born to Run by Christopher McDougall a 5 out of 5. I think if you're into running, it's a no-brainer. You have to read this. It's like the runner's Bible. But even if you're not, it's got some really fascinating stuff. I mean, if you're just into general non-fiction stuff or interested in any of the kind of the things that I've read out, obviously there's way more information that I couldn't cover in this review and discussion. But yeah, lots of cool stuff. So yeah. So there we have it. That's what I made of Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. As always, don't forget to let me know in the comments what you thought of this book if you've read it. Hit that like button if you've enjoyed this video. Hit that subscribe button for more. And I will see you soon for another bookish video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.